What new gameplay mechanics there seem to be are mainly related to subtly new combat abilities and weapons, possibly new runes, like stasis and magnesis were, and a variety of methods of traversal, including vehicles. But the general consensus is that the world is largely the same. Surely with changes to the pre-existing areas, and new areas in the sky. What's the matter of storytelling this time? Are there going to be breakable weapons, or are they going to be altered or deleted? What's the progression going to be like? Can we go up against the final boss early on again, or is there a bunch of stuff that is even more mandatory to do? What gameplay mechanics will return or improve or alter or be new? What's the combat going to be like? Is it going to be more easy or more hard? The puzzles feel more inventive, and the story, from what little I've seen of it, seems darker. Once I got close to the 6-hour mark, I found it hard to stop playing and see what more of the quests, puzzle, combat and world lay open to me. I'm at a point of the game where I'm a few hours or so past the tutorial area and can go almost anywhere. I've got so much to explore. There are changes to the world. Any sequel to a game as huge as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild already has a lot of hype and expectations on its shoulders, with lots of speculation surrounding trailers and demonstrations that started out very cryptic, only for the most recent trailers to really ramp up the hype. The 2017 launch game for Switch was mostly a game changer for The Legend of Zelda, to the point where it may not necessarily be considered a Zelda game. It is, or that it could be impossible for a subsequent Zelda game to even be as good. And I could begin all this analysis by saying, here and now, that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is not as good as its predecessor. It is better! I figure that to do the game justice, I'm going to do this review in 2 parts. The first part you're watching now is the non-spoiler overview style review. It's for those of you who have either not got the game, or have essentially got the game but have not progressed very far in it. You want to not spoil yourself and still get a general vibe of whether this game is worth experiencing? This video is for you. Well, I already said this game is better, and hopefully through this analysis and its subsequent spoiler-filled in-depth look, you'll see what I mean through the good and the bad. Enjoy. The story, from what little can be discussed here, is both traditional and new in equal measure. Those of you who have played Breath of the Wild may remember a small section of the world housing ruins of the Zonai civilization. This mysterious race is connected to the ancient battles of Hyrule, mainly in opposition to the familiar Gerudo-kin figure Ganondorf. Calamity Ganon may have been defeated, but somehow peace is not all restored years later, as a substance from the caverns below Hyrule Castle spreads sickness to the population. The heroic knight protagonist Link and Princess Zelda investigate this dilemma, only for them both to be suddenly transported elsewhere while Hyrule Castle ends up floating in the sky. It is up to Link and Zelda to find each other and destroy Ganondorf. To say any more of what happens would be a spoiler, except that the storytelling format is very similar to Breath of the Wild. You uncover the story gradually, and by at least focusing a little more on story than its predecessor, already makes the story better than before. It takes more than a couple of minutes for the game to get going, in contrast to last time, also emphasizing this storytelling focus. There are very obvious similarities to Breath of the Wild, but let's start with the presentation. The game looks very similar to before, which, considering the good, almost Miyazaki film art style, is not necessarily a bad thing. The game looks beautiful, right down to the sunsets easily visible around the sky islands and world below that never get old. The lighting is also great and actually important to note when exploring the darker areas. There are problems with pixelation and texture, with water, mountains, rock formations, and even other objects and enemies popping up as you're exploring from higher up. And even subjectively speaking, the sky islands in daytime can look glary or overexposed, owing to the odd white and yellow colours that suggest these sky islands are not as normal as the ground below. And while the lighting is still great, there are shimmering effects that ruin the use of lighting, even if it may as well be the gust of air distorting shadows from afar sometimes, like in a shrine. Of course, this means that there are performance issues like before, unfortunately. Some areas of the game or even random moments do slow down the game, but honestly, these are easily overlooked and somehow don't happen as often, showcasing an effort to try and optimize the game to run better on the 6 years plus old Nintendo Switch, as close to a consistent 30 frames per second on an okay resolution and in both TV and handheld mode, the latter of which it can run better based on resolution. The sound effects also get the job done, right down to the hard-hitting combat and Link's items on his back and belt shaking around while he's moving. But easily, the music this time is better than before. It is still minimalistic, such as the ambient tunes of piano and so on, that don't need to punctuate the overworld exploration any more than they already do. But some of the new themes, such as the Sky Islands and skydiving tunes, are lovely, and some other music, such as that heard near the beginning, set up a recurring distorted darker focus that appears in later moments and even increase in intensity at times. The music is also very dynamic in tone, with the dungeon tunes increasing in intensity the further you get into it, like it did last time, and specific old tunes being heard again after said dungeon is completed, suggesting an emotional catharsis and a comforting callback to the past for fans. In fact, there are a fair amount of old tunes from before, but they're still great. Also, the word epic is thrown around a lot, but yes, the music is epic. The voice acting is back, and again only for major characters and cutscenes. It is at least a little better than last time in the English dub, but thankfully the other options, such as Japanese, are available from the beginning rather than patched in later. Of course, the relative lack of full voice acting is a little jarring from story moment to story moment, but it can be easy to ignore if you've especially played past Zelda games. Now, what is similar about the gameplay? You control Link from the same third-person perspective, you move around a large open world in almost any direction you want, while being careful of your stamina level and resistances to certain temperatures. You engage in combat, using a fair amount of hoarded weapons that can break. You complete a variety of main quests and side quests. You complete a large variety of mini-dungeons known as shrines and upgrade your heart or stamina accordingly. You have a paraglider, horses, towers, Korok hunting, physics, cooking, armor stats to customize, harsh weather such as rain and lightning. Okay! If it's also similar, what's different about this game then? Actually, more than one may realize, from the smallest details to the most prominent gameplay mechanics. This gives a new meaning to the sky is the limit. The tutorial area takes place in the sky, and much like the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, is a big place housing 4 main abilities: Ultra Hand, Fuse, Ascend, and Recall. These gameplay mechanics expand the possibilities beyond the ruins of a preceding game, as fun as they were. Ultra Hand is used to pick up most objects and attach them to each other to create devices and vehicles, even something as simple as a boat or car. Fuse is for fusing weapons with other objects and weapons for improved attack power and durability, not to mention other uses in exploration, and to do specific attacks with specific items, especially when combined with a bow and arrow. Ascend allows Link to move upwards through solid surfaces, almost like a ghost, while Recall temporarily rewinds the movement of an object. Gone are the time-stopping stasis, icy cryonis, and bombs, the latter of which are now in a collectible flower state like in past games. Instead, you have the inventions and combinations of things that are the literal building blocks for puzzle solving and combat, and especially exploring and traversing the world as you see fit. For example, early on you learn again that Link cannot swim that far before drowning, so you need to make a boat. It can take a little time to get used to, complete with rotating on the X and Y axes. The best thing about this construction mechanic is that it is, as I interpret it, either situational or creative. The situational one is more of a puzzle where you have a locational obstacle to figure out with what materials lie around next to it, such as a bunch of wood that would normally be used for building a house in a near-ravaged Hyrule. The creative aspects refer to the devices lying around or ones that you have in your inventory being used to make quite possibly the craziest things imaginable. This construction is comparable to a lot of non-Zelda games, including one that seems to be mentioned a lot online these days, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. To be fair, I myself have not played this game, but this is the impression I get and how this Zelda game improves on this concept. While Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts makes it look like you have to construct a vehicle to actually move around a somewhat big and empty space, Tears of the Kingdom does not do that. Whether you have your situational or creative devices does not matter. You can still climb anywhere, use your paraglider and towers and fast travel, plus ride horses. Again, traversal of the world is generally up to you, with the difficulty of the terrain, enemies and temperatures being something you either want to revisit later or charge through dangerously. One of the hard things to tell in regards to the development team's intentions is whether this was to appeal to players who used stasis and other things to break the progression of Breath of the Wild. Of course, players of Breath of the Wild are divided over the durability of weapons, which again break in this game. The weapons could have lasted at least a little longer in that game. Fusing not only remedies that issue somewhat, but makes for creative combinations even as simple as a rock on a stick. Ascend and Recall are simple movement mechanics, with the former being used in simply clever ways to get Link up to surfaces that you have to get to without climbing in order to progress. These 4 main abilities are learned in shrines like last time, and a lot of these shrines are actually really fun. They tend to be very inventive, where so much as tinkering with the main device not only presents the breadcrumbs to solving the puzzle, but subtly makes you feel like a genius, an element of good game design. You cannot even bring out devices in your inventory, making these puzzles a situational one rather than a creative one. Plus, it's a situation you can make possible in the overworld exploration. While some shrine puzzles are poorly designed or are over too quickly, not to mention feature devices that may be hard to understand at first if you've not seen or used them elsewhere, this feature brought back from Breath of the Wild could still be a lot of fun, and more often than not, make the player wonder what puzzle or combat situation they're going to come across next. Every 4 Lights of Blessing gained from these shrines allow you to, again, upgrade your heart and stamina counters. It's up to you what you choose, whether you get hurt in combat and obstacles too much, or need to climb, glide, and run around for longer times. It is important to note these stats and shrine devices for the main quests and side content in this game. Dungeons return in this game and are surprisingly a mixture of the traditional and the new. The main dungeons bear little resemblance to the giant mechanical animals from before, apart from the switches to interact with and a relative lack of complexity and length. But the best thing is that each dungeon is different from another in terms of aesthetics and atmosphere and general puzzle designs. Each dungeon is an exploration of multiple floors of enemies and puzzles and traps like past Zelda games, but with the interesting traversal mechanics of both this game and Breath of the Wild. Each dungeon ends with an epic boss fight, which also differ heavily in aesthetics and even attack patterns, none of that fight again and bite 4 times stuff. All of the boss fights, save for one, do come across as a little too easy, but they are more memorable and increased in scope and spectacle. There is more to the series of main quests than these 4 dungeons, but you're better off discovering that for yourself. And even then, you don't have to do all these quests. You can easily get sidetracked by shrines, map revealing towers, hidden Koroks, including quick Korok escort missions that give you 2 seats instead of 1, and many side quests. The side quests feel like they have better incentives, and sometimes function like a chain of events, where the NPCs move around the world more and rebuild Hyrule with a purpose, making it great to interact with them too. Even the characters actually comment on things you do, making it all the more interesting and rewarding, like you actually did something. It helps that the large world of Hyrule, while very similar in geography to before, is surprisingly different in many areas, so that it's not a redoing of the past game. Add to that the Sky Islands above and dark depths below, with the differing obstacles and methods of exploration, and you've got a huge and challenging game. Even the depths have enemies and a substance known as gloom that decrease your maximum hearts unless you find a light root beacon to rest at or return via vast travel to the surface, making health items and even weapons made out of metal that can decay temporarily less useful. Of course, with all of this praise, are there problems besides the aforementioned performance issues? Well, a fair amount of it is subjective. The game is compelling, with a huge playground of content to play around with, but this can be very daunting to even the most seasoned open world game veterans. It is up to the player more than the game whether they get distracted by something on the way to a quest waypoint or another beacon of interest, but believe me, no matter how early you want to get to the end credits, this game is a huge time sink. So was Breath of the Wild for that matter. To be fair, if you disliked Breath of the Wild, this game probably won't change your mind. It even features the weapon durability system, as improved as it is in this game. But the world of Tears of the Kingdom feels denser, and the new areas are really fun to explore, complete with a better story and soundtrack. There are 2 nitpicks to address, however, in regards to accessibility. The controls are almost the exact same as Breath of the Wild, and outside of swapping the X and B buttons for running and jumping, cannot be customized outside of movement and camera stick controls to a more accessible degree. Also, the subtitles cannot be customized in font color or size. How can one be expected to read the subtitles during the Japanese dub if they are obscured by a bright light on screen? Again, these are just nitpicks, and one can get used to the controls in time, but these staples from before should have been changed. What changes there are, however, to the Breath of the Wild formula that the Legend of Zelda series is currently going with are nothing short of staggering and an amazingly commendable technical achievement. It is easy to say if this game looks and plays very similarly to before, only for some hours and even more of playtime to lead to uncovering some of the coolest changes and gameplay mechanics and progression and lines of quests that will never leave your brain when done playing. Of course, there are performance and accessibility issues and some frustrating moments or gameplay mechanics that are unfortunately brought back from Breath of the Wild, all of which suggest that maybe a Tears of the Kingdom ran on the Nintendo Switch's successor, it would be a somewhat smoother experience. But rest assured, this outstanding game that still runs well on that little Switch and filled to the brim with content that adds more to the previous games to the point where the hopefully one-off price increase is justified, is a non-DLC sequel, Legend of Zelda game, Nintendo game, open world adventure game, or just overall video game that no one should absolutely miss out on. Well, that is my part 1 of my Tears of the Kingdom review, which I hope has been essentially an overview of the game, and you can tell me what you think of the game, whether you've sunk close to 0 or hundreds of hours into the game. There is much I want to say about the story, progression, gameplay mechanics, and even a little more of the presentation, but to do so would be a spoiler. Hopefully by the time I've done that part of the review, you will have completed all the main quests and done as much of the side content as possible, or maybe you don't want to play the game at all and just want to hear me talk about Tears of the Kingdom for several minutes, so you can join me in for more in-depth coverage of the game. This is my 70th game review on this channel and I can do what I like, but I hope you enjoyed. Have a good day or night or whatever it is, and I'll see you in a little while. Oh hey, I feel like playing Tears of the Kingdom some more. Such a distraction. Hey, bye.